Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Some people never get the opportunity to live indirectly through their children. I, like my son Doug, am lucky that he plays in college. I trained him and his sister Franny very hard when they were little. They both watched me closely as I played in amateur-level football leagues. My weekend was dedicated to their football tournaments, where they were both stars. On weekdays, I drove them to and from training, as well as to skills and training sessions at any park that was not in use. They played sports every month of the year, but football was something they really excelled at. In addition, my wife, Shay, wanted them to be so absorbed in sports that it would be difficult for them to engage in more risky activities. At first glance, it worked. At first sight, Doug quit football before his senior year in high school and turned down football scholarships. We think it's mostly because of rebellion. Something like, get it. It worked out well enough for him, and he became a striker for the school football team, and sometimes an away player. So how come I'm watching Doug play in college? Well, Tech thought he had the strongest leg they had seen in a while and offered him a football scholarship. He was supposed to score field goals, but he handled the players so well that he became their #1 player. Like a real beginner, Franny was incredibly angry. Doug throws football, causes general outrage, and eventually smells like a rose. Now, in Franny's rearview mirror, all the Division II schools are chasing Franny. She wants to play in a Division I school, just like her brother. Ah, the sibling rivalry. At every home game, Shay and I have seats in the section reserved for the parents of the players. What makes the game even cooler is that everyone is actually sitting and watching the game, rather than getting up, starting with, "The flag has fallen," and ending with, "That's it." Another advantage is that the section for drunk students is far away. If we wanted to, the school could get us tickets for away matches as well. We haven't done that yet, but we plan to go there once or twice. Our local TV station has a contract to broadcast all technical games. I'm recording them in the cloud. When a quarterback makes a touchdown pass, they zoom in on the image of his parents to see their reaction. When a running quarterback throws a touchdown, they zoom in on the image of his parents to see their reaction. When a player lands a stunning shot in the penalty area, they move on to their parents. Yeah, well, who can blame them? Parents are not very sociable, especially if your child likes to play football. So during the first home game in the stands, we did not have many friends. Nevertheless, it was a lot of fun. Despite the fact that my short business trips never caused me concern, the upcoming release of the product was scheduled for the weekend in another state. I had to skip the game, but I planned to watch it later in my hotel room. I'd rather be at the stadium, but the job pays the bills, and the player's scholarship doesn't cover all the expenses. Shay and I met shortly after graduating from college. Our companies sent us to the same seminar. Our first meeting was uneventful. "Brock Zellman, are you related to Charles Zellman?" An attractive brunette asked, glancing at my name tag. "Well, Shay Wilson, as far as I know, no. I suppose you know him?" I look up from her breasts and the name tag next to them. Actually, he was a year older than me in high school. "I just thought that with your unique surname we have a chance," she smiled. "Maybe we should have a drink tonight and I'll find out if you're related to and or Nancy Wilson." I smiled back. "Nice tackle. Of course, I will meet you after the last session in the lobby of the hotel, after visiting the ladies' room." Later, as I stood in the hotel lobby wondering if Shay had confused me, one of my work colleagues spoke to me. He was passionate about the last performance, so I pretended to be interested. I saw Shay out of the corner of my eye. "Sorry to interrupt you, but my friend is here." "No problem, Breeze. See you tomorrow." "Hi, Shay. Are you ready to go?" "The Breeze?" "Yes, it's a combination of my first and last name. I've heard it all my life, so it kind of stuck with me." "Well, Breeze, you offered to buy me a drink. Let's go." It's corny, but we got along really well that night. After a gentle kiss on the lips, I wanted more, but it only happened after a few months and after several dates. It was worth the wait. There was nothing unusual about our courtship and marriage. Her parents seemed to like me, and mine liked her. Since the family budget was limited, it was a small event attended by about 40 people. We chose a beginner's home located about halfway between her office and mine. 2 years later, we welcomed Doug, and less than 2 years later, Franny showed up. Since this was the first and only time I was married, I had no doubt that there would be arguments. We could find the stupidest reasons to quarrel. There was not enough money. There wasn't enough time. I should have consulted with Shay first. Why am I bothering her with this? We went out of our way to piss each other off until the dust from the quarrels settled. To put an end to our abusive behavior towards each other, we eventually agreed to see a psychologist. It seemed to help a little, but we still have a lot to do. One Saturday night, after a little argument about something I can't remember, we decided to attend my company's party. Shay flirted and danced shamelessly all evening, just trying to provoke me on stage. I watched her like a hawk, but she kept reaching out to me. However, there were touches, chaste kisses, and hugs. I wasn't going to play her game. On the way home, Shay tried to pick a fight. Some of your salesmen said that you seemed to like it when they flirted with me. Sometimes the bodies are never found. They just disappear. No disputes over custody or alimony. Her eyes widened and she fell silent. It was cold in our house for more than a week. There was no apology. What really pissed me off was that a week after the party, the salesman told me that I wasn't worthy of the hot beauty I was married to. One jerk even had the audacity to ask if we had an open marriage. The note on my desk said that since I was inadequate in bed, I should let her go every weekend. The day Tech played state, I asked Shay to refrain from telling me how things turned out. I wanted to watch it in my room while enjoying dinner and drinks that the company paid for in the room. To provide intrigue, I turned off my mobile phone during the game. The game itself was sloppy, which is the norm for teams playing at the bottom. Doug landed a few punches. At the end of the third quarter, Doug struck again. But this time some overly aggressive defensive player knocked him down with a deliberate cheap shot. A personal foul, a rough kick to the ball, but Doug stayed down. The players nearby looked scared and dropped to one knee. The replay showed that Doug's leg bent in a way it should never bend. When Theismann's broadcast rule came into effect, they did not show a replay of how he broke his leg. In 1985, quarterback Joe Theismann was fired and his leg was broken in the most ridiculous way. We all know this because it has been shown from different angles about 1,000 times. The reaction was immediate and furious. Broadcasters now avoid showing you bloody footage. After watching the video, I repeated the collision several times. Doug will never play again this season. Eventually, they loaded him into a cart and he went to the hospital, as I assumed. He waved as the crowd cheered him on. I paused the broadcast and turned on my mobile phone. I've watched a lot of text and voice messages from friends and family. Then I called Shay. She was very upset. Doug was in surgery, and she promised to call me back when she found out more. After contacting the airlines, I realized that I would not be able to return home this evening. The food is cold, and I've already run out of beer. What else could have gone wrong? Never tempt the gods like that. I continued watching the show. As the cart rolled across the lawn, they moved to the parents' section and showed Shay, who was dripping tears and covering her mouth with her hands. Robert Marks comforted her. He's a salesman at my company and was one of the guys who hung out with her at a corporate party. He kissed her on the forehead and pressed her to his chest. Why the hell is he sitting in my seat and comforting my wife? In the on-screen credits, they were even mistakenly identified as Brock and Shay Zellman. A 6-second video clip that ended my ignorance and probably my marriage. My phone rang from time to time. I didn't answer any calls, but I listened to messages. None of them, including Shay, mentioned the 6-second video. Shay's message said that Doug had regained consciousness. I called the university hospital and was put through to Doug. "How are you, Dad?" "What is it?" he asked in his usual cheerful voice. "I just saw you get beaten in a game." "How much?" "Well, this season is over, but I only have a few broken bones and ligament damage. At least it's not my kicking foot. They operated on me almost immediately and moved me back to this ward not so long ago. I'll be fine in a few months." "Does the hospital have a special attitude towards football players?" "Yes, probably. A couple of junior nurses are being overly friendly. This should make me popular at frat parties, because I need night medical care," he chuckled. "This is my boy. Looking for a way to make money on it. Well, I have to go. I'm glad to hear that nothing terrible happened. I'll see you when I get home. Love you." "Wait a minute. Mom wants to talk to you. Tell her I'm busy and I'm working on something important. Good night." "Good night, Dad." My heart was still racing. Sometimes you can see how the child hits and can no longer walk. I avoided that bullet. I turned off my phone again. I didn't feel like talking to anyone else tonight. The company I work for manufactures data storage devices and search software for tracking movements using GPS. Most often they are used for tracking or mapping purposes. Nowadays, almost all cars send a signal that is picked up by our software. You can determine the change in their global location and then calculate how quickly they did it. By comparing GPS readings with known highways, you will learn how traffic is moving. Mapping does not depend on a single vehicle, but unites all traffic flows moving in this direction. Repeat this for all roads in all directions, and you will begin to understand how big the storage requirements are. All that is recorded is just the device ID, coordinates, and date and timestamp. If you think about it, it's pretty simple. Law enforcement agencies use it to detect people at the crime scene. How do I know that? I worked on the team that wrote this software. When the time came to act, I decided to play detective before the data was archived. I've done this countless times. When the police call, we cross-check the devices for the time leading up to the crime. Cars that drive slowly through an area and then return a day or two later, on the same day as the crime was committed, are usually thoroughly investigated. Cars that have never stopped at home before, and then something bad happens to them at this time, are also subjected to a thorough inspection. Such tools make it easier to identify potential suspects. There are several lawsuits going through the courts alleging that this violates someone's right to privacy. Most of them lost, because in fact it is not so much different from the testimony of eyewitnesses. Having the exact global coordinates of my house, I started searching for all GPS signals in the vicinity of this place, starting at about 2 a.m. on Saturday. As expected, there was little activity at this time of day. At about 8 a.m., the database detected a new device and almost immediately a second device. The first one most likely belonged to Shay's car, and the second one belonged to her mobile phone after it disconnected from the home Wi-Fi. By collecting data from both devices into a temporary database, I found out where these devices have moved since then. Shay's car stopped moving at about 8:30 a.m., but her cell phone was still moving. After collecting this data, I began to record the movement of the device through the streets and buildings. What I found made my blood boil. Her car stopped at the house owned by Robert and Teresa Marks. Her mobile phone stayed there until about 11 a.m., and then she went to the football stadium on the campus of the University of Technology. So she threw her own little party at the Marks residence. Maybe they were just betting on the game and looking at the statistics, right? It's my turn to call it bullshit. Around the time Doug was taken to the university hospital, Shay's mobile phone also got there, where he is currently staying. I think she'll need a ride to pick up her car. On a sudden impulse, I decided to make a map of all the movements of Shay's car over the past week. This is all that can be found without resorting to archive databases. I discarded everything except the stopping points, and the picture turned out to be disgusting. As expected, she drove to work, stopping briefly, probably at traffic lights. The stop at the grocery store after work was not surprising. The stop at the Marks house on Wednesday from noon to 1:30 p.m. infuriated me. Armed with what I now knew, I sent several emails to various firms specializing in tracking people. Private detectives, that's what they like to call themselves. Exhausted, I dozed off. In the morning, before turning on my mobile phone, I repeated my searches. Shay's mobile phone moved from the hospital around 11 p.m. and went straight to her car. After some hesitation, her car drove away from the Marks house, and both devices returned to our house shortly before midnight. Several of my emails with requests about tariffs and availability of services were answered. Of course, they were available to help me if my wallet was thicker. It looks like I'm going to need a different strategy. When my cell phone came to life, there were even more well-wishers and an angry Shay, since I didn't call her or text her. I still wasn't in the mood to talk, so I sent a message saying late to bed, early to get up. I'll chat with you later. My phone rang, announcing an incoming call. Of course, Shay, but I just switched it to messages. I didn't have to wait at our demonstration stand for another hour and a half, so I delved into the story of Robert and Teresa Marks. I specifically searched for their email address and phone number, which I found. They were the parents of the same child, and their daughter went to a different school than Franny. It was time to go to work, so I saved all this information. My plan was for Teresa Marks to discover them if they got together again on Wednesday. The next hurdle I had to overcome was how to provide this information without it pointing at me. Over lunch, I found out a little more about Teresa. My plan was to have a photo of Robert, Shay, and her car printed at the print shop, with a note saying that this car was seen at her house on Wednesday around noon, and the lady and gentleman went inside for an hour and a half. I would leave an envelope for Teresa in her office and let her do all the dirty work. Before my lunch break ended, I called Doug again. He was the center of attention and even gave an interview to our local television station. It turned out that due to the fact that he converted a penalty, our team first lost, and after a few games they scored an assist, and then held on and won the match. It was a big price to pay, but he liked it. Shay must have been in the hospital because she called as soon as I disconnected from Doug. It's a breeze that should have pissed her off. It's your wife. Won't it kill you if you talk to me? Hey, I'm trying to make a living. What's so important that it can't wait until I get home? There was a pause. I just miss you, and it was very hard when Doug got injured. Well, he seems to be fine. My lunch break is coming to an end. I'll call you from the airport later tonight. I didn't wait for an answer and ignored the immediate repeat call. I should probably slow down, otherwise she might not repeat her date on Wednesday. I really want Teresa to do this, because I don't think I could have avoided jail time if I had intervened. I prepared an envelope for Teresa and sent it on the way to the airport. The fact that I arrived closer to midnight on Sunday gave me an excuse to spend quite a bit of time with Shay. On Monday morning, she left for work before I got up. Since I had free time, I stopped by the university hospital and visited Doug. There were too many signatures on his cast account. His current girlfriend, whom I've never met, really wanted to get him away from the fawning cheerleaders and nurses. Later that day, Shay sent a message, "What time are you coming home tonight?" I replied, "There's a lot of paperwork due to work, so don't wait and eat without me." When I got home around 9 p.m., I realized that Shay was furious. I thought that if I kept her in this mood, she would seek solace in Robert's arms again. Our conversation was dominated by my rambling about imaginary work problems, about my boss and clients, and eventually Shay said she was going to bed. On Tuesday, Franny sent me a message saying that she had received an invitation to visit the campus. It worked perfectly, and I replied that we should go out and celebrate tonight. When we got home, it was about 10 p.m. and everyone was exhausted. Once again, I didn't have to spend time with Shay. Wednesday morning brought mixed emotions. I wanted to believe that Shay would never cheat, but it was suppressed by the desire for Teresa to catch her in the act. Unlike the previous few days, there were no messages from Shay. So in the late afternoon, I sent her an email, "I'll be home early today." Shay usually gets home before me, unless she's late on business. When Franny came home from training around 7 p.m., she looked around. "Where's Mom?" "I'm not sure. I haven't heard from her today. I sent a message earlier, but did not receive a response. It's even for the best. She's been a real bitch lately. Are you guys okay?" I don't know. The word bitchy is not appropriate to describe this. What do you want for dinner? I have some protein dishes, so don't worry about me. I dialed Shay's number and left another voice message. Franny went to bed at her usual time. I started to worry and sent another text message. There was still no answer. I reconnected to the database and made sure that Shay's car arrived at the Marks house a few minutes after noon. This time she left at about 12:45 and stopped at a parking lot near the Federal Highway 50 kilometers north of the city. That's where she is now. Franny left early because she had a weight training session before school. Shay didn't answer any of my calls or texts. Mixed feelings again. On my way to work, I stopped by to see Doug. His girlfriend was there again. No, he hadn't heard from his mom lately. He was thrilled to be discharged today. At about 10 a.m., I was called to the front desk, where a man was waiting for me who wanted to talk to me. Nate Bellows introduced himself as a detective. They found Shay's car, and she was locked in the trunk. She was taken to the Merciful Heart Hospital. Throughout all this, I had to answer the usual questions like, "Where have you been?" Eventually, Detective Bellows got bored and wished me luck. The way he said it made me think there was something else in this story. Trying to follow the concerned husband scenario, I took some more personal leave and went to the Merciful Heart Hospital. When I arrived, Shay was not in the room, so I waited in the area reserved for relatives. A couple of nurses were laughing. "I think the husband did it." "Maybe, but you have to give him credit. I've never seen anyone get so decorated, and now we have two of them. Were they talking about Shay and Robert? Now I really wanted to see her. When they took Shay back to her room, I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. She was painted blue from head to toe. I was told it was printing ink. It will wash off over time. The hospital staff did everything they could, but only with time could it completely disappear. She had to undergo several rubbing sessions with alcohol and solvent. Gradually, it had to pass. Adding to her new look was a 5-centimeter red spot on her forehead. The nurse called it a crude tattoo. The letter A was carved into the skin with a knife, and then some red ink was applied to the wound. Rude, but effective. Shay claimed that her car was stolen. I noticed the nurse roll her eyes. I looked terrible. Shay was sobbing. But at least you're alive. Where were you when it happened? What time is it? My questions were ignored as Shay continued to cry. Her medical record was hanging on the door, and I took a look at some of the photos. I almost burst out laughing again. She also had a big red letter A on her chest. It was about 30 centimeters in size. It's the same with the knife and the red ink. When I went out into the hallway, one of the nurses said to the other, "And she looks exactly like her boyfriend. He was brought in this morning a few hours after her." "The guy?" another nurse asked. "Well, that's what we're guessing about. You know, different surnames, but both wear wedding rings." I wandered the corridors in search of the room where Robert Marks was staying. He had no visitors. Shay had no other injuries, but both of Robert's legs were in a cast. Don't I like it when everything comes together in a single plan? It was a very productive day. There was a story on the local evening news about a break-in in which the homeowner's legs were broken and he was found covered in blue paint. Anti-crime officers would like to pay for any information that will help arrest those responsible for this despicable act. When I called the university hospital, Doug was no longer listed as a patient. I decided again that I needed to know. I'll contact him when the money runs out. Franny came at the usual time. Without Mom again? Yes and no. She is a patient of the merciful heart. Apparently, her car was stolen. They painted her blue, and then painted a small scarlet letter A on her forehead and a large scarlet A on her chest. Like in that novel about Puritans and adultery? That's what I'm guessing. There is a guy in the same hospital, also decorated in a similar way. He was found at his house. Your mom claims that her car was stolen, but I don't believe it. You can visit her, but I'm gathering my strength and searching the internet for divorce lawyers. I'm fine. It's unrealistic. How can you sit so still? I've had a whole day to think about it. She's been cheating for at least a month. I think she wanted to leave. I have 2 wonderful children with her, but it's time to turn the page. I wish I had a photo. She looks ridiculous. Franny perked up. Hey, I'm going to visit my mom. I just smiled. Yes, she even persuaded her mother to show her the big red letter A. The photos were posted on her social media page, along with information that her lover was in a similar situation. Throwing yourself under the wheels of a bus is cool. My parents and Shay's called, and I repeated to them the story of the carjacking and gave them information about her room. I even got a message from Doug. He didn't seem to pay attention to the consequences. Since I no longer cared how the tech football team was doing, I convinced Franny to visit the campus this weekend. Within an hour, she had booked plane tickets, a hotel, and rented a car. On Friday afternoon, before the flight, Shay texted me, "Will you come to my place?" I just wanted to say no, but Franny convinced me to send, "No, but your boyfriend has 2 broken legs, so maybe he needs company. It lies 5 houses below, by the elevators." After landing, I discovered that a steady stream of missed calls had accumulated while we were flying. I just ignored the calls. I had a wonderful weekend with Franny. Well, actually, I sent her to the football team on Friday night and have only received messages since. After spending 48 hours in the company of myself, I was ready to return home. I spent some time arranging an appointment to start the divorce process. I watched the tech game on Saturday night. I'm glad I did it. Doug got more airtime than in all the previous games combined. They even conducted an interview with him in the hospital room. His girlfriend has a hard time keeping her job. Doug was surrounded by several charming beauties. When Franny and I returned late Sunday evening, the lights were on in the house, and there were several cars parked in front of the entrance. The time of the ambush. We entered and saw that the cheater and her parents were sitting in the living room. A ghostly glow emanated from the neck, as the blue color was still preserved. The red letter A on her forehead was covered with a bandage. Ignoring Shay, I looked at her parents. "Hi, Dad, Mom. What brings you here so late at night? Stop talking nonsense. You weren't there to take Shay home." "Oh yeah, I forgot that her boyfriend has 2 broken legs. It's my fault." "He's not my boyfriend," Shay said. "A lover?" Franny giggled. Her grandmother replied, "Young lady, watch your mouth." Shay jumped up, and I thought she was going to slap Franny. Her father tugged on her ponytail, and she plopped back down between her parents. "Don't you ever threaten my granddaughter again," came from her furious father. I took the initiative into my own hands. "Listen, Shay, you've ruined your marriage, and I'm filing for divorce. I expect that the documents will be submitted this week. Franny's going off to college next fall, so we need to make arrangements for visits. As soon as she leaves, I'll sell my half of the house." Just like that? To agree or disagree? "Oh, now you want to talk? It's a little late for that, don't you think? I would ask you why, but I've already realized that it doesn't really matter." Shay's father chimed in. "She's going to have lawsuits. You will be responsible for this." "Lawsuits?" "Yes. The police brought her to justice for providing false information. They used a GPS navigator to locate her car, which was apparently stolen. There was no hijacking." "That's great. I'll probably have to split the cost of new blue outfits." Franny giggled. "And blue eyeliner, as well as accessories in blue, such as handbags and shoes." Shay's mom barked at us. "That's enough. Why don't you make it easier for everyone and take her with you? We will even help you pack 1 or 2 suitcases." "No, this is my house and I'm staying," Shay snapped. "Well, it's been a long weekend and I'm going to bed. You can sleep on the couch." I locked the bedroom door. I don't know when they left, but Shay's parents weren't home this morning. Franny has already left. I left as fast as I could. The divorce papers were handed to Shay, of course, at her workplace. There's no need to behave right now. It took a while, but we got divorced. Franny convinced the judge to let her stay in the house with me as primary caregiver. She called Shay a bad role model. One day, a gift from Franny was waiting for me on the kitchen table. It was a t-shirt with the inscription, "I'm almost as cool as my daughter." I wore it on the day of signing her college papers in high school. Franny was going to succeed by playing football for a Division I school. As expected, I had to endure several interviews with the authorities. My lawyer was always there, because I wasn't going to let my guard down. Since Teresa's brother owns a printing company, she and he were mentioned as suspects, but no charges were ever filed. Doug recovered and began his sophomore year as the #1 player. It still amazes me that no one ever mentioned seeing Shay with anyone else at that football game. The writing on the screen must have misled everyone except me. Franny's first year of school was an ordeal for her. She didn't have time for games, as she was on the bench due to the large number of high school students. However, her scholarship was extended, and now she has a lot of playing time. Doug has grown his hair out, and almost every time I see him, he has a new girlfriend. At home or on the road, I attend both children's games, if work allows. What could be better than such an inheritance? I rarely go on dates, but that's slowly starting to change. It took me the better part of a year to have a one-night stand. I felt like I was cheating. What's wrong with that? I miss what I had, but not what it turned into. As expected, I see Shay at major events with our children. She brought a guy with her a few times, but it was always the same guy. If we happened to chat, I would quickly end the conversation, trying not to be rude, and mingle with the other guests. Not letting her calm my conscience is my last petty revenge. End.